Hello everyone, this is Anton and welcome back to What the Math. This is episode 11. Today we're going to be talking about the Hutts. This is a star called YouTube. That's right, it's a star called YouTube. Welcome to YouTube everyone. And this star is essentially where Hutts have made their new home thousands of years before the Battle of Yavin. Now, this is a yellow star that has some of the most important, most influential planets in the Hutt space, and essentially this is where the Hutts have moved after their original planet called Varl was actually destroyed by them. They actually destroyed it to the point where they were no longer able to survive on it, and this is kind of what happened on their new world as well. So we're going to start creating this in Universe Sandbox 2, and we're going to start with the innermost planet first, and this planet is called Asium. It's a molten world that's very, very close to the star called YouTube. And so here is Asium, a very, very hot, very molten world that is one of the few planets in the system that doesn't actually have anything important and doesn't have any life on it, and neither does it have any moons. So there's really nothing else to say about this planet other than it's the closest to the star. The second planet from YouTube is called Nal Hutta. Now, this is a terrestrial planet that has habitants on it, and it does have some Hutts residing on it, but it's a more or less known planet because it's a little bit too hot here, and other than the fact that it does have the native population living here, there is really nothing we know about it. So I'm going to place its two moons, and we don't really know the names of these moons either, so it's going to be a randomly generated moon called Siman Korea and Rukmanstaska, I think. Pronounce this as you will. Anyway, so here are its two randomly generated moons and the planet called Nal Hutta. The third, and this is the most important planet in the system, is Nal Hutta. Now, it has a lot of history behind it, and it's actually a planet where originally it was actually called Evokar. This was the original name because there was a species called Evokai that used to live here, and this was their planet. Now, what happened to Evokai is actually really interesting and kind of defines how Hutts like to do business. So, Evokai were not particularly intelligent or not particularly clever because they decided to start gambling, start doing business with the Hutts, and after hundreds of years, they essentially lost their planets to the debts to the Hutt cartels, which decided to claim this planet for themselves when their old planet called Varl was no longer suitable for their own interest and for their life. And so they moved to Evokar and renamed it Nal Hutta. They then enslaved the Evokai and forced them to build their temples, forced them to build all kinds of construction here, all of their factories, and this originally beautiful swampy planet has turned into a nightmare that you'll see when I play through it in Star Wars: The Old Republic near the end of the video. So essentially this become a polluted planet because the Hutts have moved here and built all of their factories on this planet. And this planet, interestingly, has 5 moons, and one of the moons is actually very important. We'll get to it when we build the last moon. And the moon I'm talking about is called Nar Shaddaa. Now, this is actually not exactly what it looks like. I tried to recreate this as accurate as possible, but this would be Nar Shaddaa before it got settled by the Hutts. Now, so Nar Shaddaa is actually mentioned in many different novels. It's mentioned in Clone Wars. It's also mentioned in almost every single Star Wars video game because it's a very important location. It's actually the location that always tries to compete with Coruscant because it is the only other planet that is entirely a city. It's actually really interesting. I'll get to show you what it looks like in Star Wars The Old Republic as well. It's a very beautiful location. It's actually one of my most favorite locations in Star Wars The Old Republic. And so the interesting thing about Nar Shaddaa is that it's essentially become the center for the Hutt cartels. They moved from Nal Hutta because it became a little bit too polluted for them. They still have some of their residences and some of their temples there, but they moved to Nar Shaddaa, and this is where they run the entire galaxies from. Basically, this is where you come to do business with the Hutts. And essentially, they mined Nal Hutta, and then they moved all of their mined materials to Nar Shaddaa, where essentially you do most of your trade, business, and all kinds of illegal activities as well. So a lot of the buildings on Nar Shaddaa were actually built by the Evokai when they got enslaved by the Hutts. They actually sent them here and made them build the entire cities. And so the entire construction of Nar Shaddaa was done by the slave forces that the Hutts were able to essentially send here from Nal Hutta. And Nal Hutta itself is relatively empty now. It's basically a swampy, deserted, polluted area where all of the species died out and only the most resilient of the species have survived. And I'll show you some of them in the Star Wars The Old Republic. And on Nar Shaddaa, it's actually interesting because basically the entire planet was transformed and became a city. And here, once the city was finished, the Evokai, they actually evolved as well. As a matter of fact, most of them moved under the city. They lived in the lower levels of the city where they've, over the 500 years after the construction of the original city, they've evolved into this kind of a dangerous looking species that basically thrives on killing everything it sees. And what's important to mention is that the main difference between Coruscant and Nar Shaddaa is that Coruscant only has dangerous levels on the bottom, whereas Nar Shaddaa is, the entire city is essentially a filthy, polluted, infested with crime place where you essentially just go to either hide from something or to cause trouble. And so that's Nar Shaddaa and Nal Hutta, and we'll get to investigate them in a little bit more detail in Star Wars The Old Republic. And let's continue with the fourth planet here. The fourth planet is called Nal Yeshu, and unfortunately we don't really know the name of its two moons, but we know that they are there. And Nal Yeshu is another colonized terrestrial planet that actually has something like 10 billion sentient beings living on it. So it's actually a relatively important planet as well. It's just we don't really, unfortunately, know much about it. But we know that it's controlled by the Hutts as well. And then we come to the gas giant that is in the system, and it's called Kiskua. Now, this is a gas giant that is probably one of the few locations that doesn't actually have many Hutts or no Hutts at all, actually. And it does have something like 18 different moons, so we're going to actually add them. Now, interestingly, one of these moons is super interesting. So let me just count that I'm doing this correctly. All right, so there we go. 17 moons of Kiskua, and one of the moons, we don't actually know which one, but one of them has a very interesting atmospheric effect. Let's just say it's this one here. Electrical atmosphere, where they have actually found organic and unicellular life living inside the atmosphere. So it's actually a gas giant that does have life on it. But other than that, we don't really know much about Kiskua or its importance in the Star Wars galaxy, at least for now. And lastly, we come to the last planet here, and this is the cold planet called Nar Hutta. Now, this cold planet is surprisingly also inhabited by the Hutts, and it does have a little bit of settlements here. Now, even though it doesn't look like a habitable planet, they've actually created these domes where they've created atmosphere needed for their survival, and they do have certain species that they've even delivered to this planet so that it can actually become their future home one day. So they've even brought vegetation and different kinds of flora and fauna to this planet just to make it more sustainable. But just like every other object in the solar system, it's of course controlled by one of the Hutts and their criminal mind. And so this is kind of what this system looks like from the top here. You can kind of see there's SAM really close. There's Nal Koska right here, Nal Hutta and Nar Shaddaa, Nal Yeshu, then we have Kiskua, the gas giant, and a very cold planet called Nar Hutta. Now let's actually explore a little bit more of Nal Hutta and also Nar Shaddaa in more detail by using Star Wars The Old Republic, because you actually get to visit these two planets and moons, and you get to actually do things on them and basically explore them in more detail. And welcome to the Glorious Jewel. Nal Hutta means glorious jewel in Huttese because of a really interesting effect that you can see in the skies. It's actually formed by a radioactive gas cloud from a nearby solar system in the system of Ganath. And because of this, they actually thought that this is a very beautiful location for their new colony and their new homeworld. But this is how Han Solo describes this planet to Chewbacca. Nal Hutta means glorious jewel in Huttese, but trust me pal, it ain't pretty. Bunch of swamps and bogs, and the whole place stinks like a sewer in the middle of a garbage dump. And honestly, I think this is a pretty good description of this planet because it is overpolluted, it looks very dangerous, it probably doesn't smell very good here, and the only species that have survived here are, well, at least one of the few species are called chemilizards that are able to extract nutrients from the industrial waste of the Hutta planet, but no one else has been able to survive here. Now, as I mentioned before, the Evokai species used to call this Evokar, but something like 15,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Hutts came and decided to replace the government here and created their own new homeworld. And surprisingly, the Galactic Republic actually supported the Hutts because technically they had all the legal rights to own this planet. But what you may not know is that for thousands of years, Hutts have never actually supported the Republic or the Empire and have always been managed or have always been able to stay quite neutral even during the Galactic War.
There it is, the belly of the beast. It doesn't look like we're gonna have to break in, but the place is crawling with Vathra's cronies.
And so even though the Galactic Empire did try to control the planet Nal Hutta and Nar Shaddaa, for the most part, Hutts were able to actually maintain full control and never really budged in terms of supporting one side or the other. But what's really sad is that originally this planet was actually a very lush jungle filled with oceans and lots of different species living here. But because Hutts decided to terraform this into their own sort of preferred polluted barren wasteland, most of the species here eventually disappeared and basically died out. And so most of the surface now is covered by flat marshy bogs and swamps. There's a lot of muddy puddles and patches of marsh grass, and it does have some insects and spiders living here, but other than dangerous scary creatures, there's really nothing you can find. And all of the raw materials that were actually strip mined here were then transported to Nar Shaddaa for processing and for export. And so I think this kind of gives you an idea of how Hutts like to live their lives. They basically come somewhere, destroy it, and then move to a new world. And for thousands of years, this planet was actually controlled by some of the oldest Hutt families known as the Clans of the Ancients, who watched activities on both Nal Hutta and Nar Shaddaa from their homes on different planets. But interestingly, for the Hutts, Nal Hutta is actually considered to be paradise. This is actually where most of them want to live, where most of them want to own some kind of property, even though to everyone else this is a living nightmare, a disgusting and a dangerous place to visit. And actually many races use this planet as a kind of a place where they would actually threaten to send their children if they misbehave. And so this is Nal Hutta, or as it's more commonly known, Hutta in a nutshell. And we're also going to take a look at the more beautiful world called Nar Shaddaa, where Hutts have actually established a very, very interesting and very fully functioning city empire. And so Nar Shaddaa is actually a very beautiful location to visit, especially in Star Wars The Old Republic. And this is essentially a whole city planet, similar in a sense to the planet we took a look at before, called Coruscant, which is of course the center of the Galactic Empire. Now, one thing I've actually already mentioned, but I wanted to reiterate, is that 500 years after the construction of the city, the Evokai who were responsible for building this were actually freed from their labor. They became free species, and the Hutts released their species from slavery. And because Evokai didn't really have anywhere to go anymore, they took refuge under the city, under the Nar Shaddaa undercity, and began to mutate into savages. They actually have become a very dangerous, very kind of a scary looking species, and will most likely attack anyone on sight now. And at this point in the game, this is about maybe 4,000 or 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, Nar Shaddaa is actually rivaling Coruscant. As a matter of fact, it's one of the hubs of interstellar trade, and they always try to compete with Coruscant for being the most important trade in the galaxy. But because something like 4,000 years ago there was a battle that disrupted the hyperspace routes, eventually Nal Hutta and Nar Shaddaa devolved into a kind of a haven for smugglers and pirates because the galactic trade was no longer possible, and instead they actually became the smuggling capital of the galaxy. So if you want to do any kind of a crime, or if you just want to hide from someone, or if you want to go to a casino and spend all of your money, or do anything illegal in the galaxy, this is essentially where you would come, because this is the biggest pit of the biggest illegal and villainous activities you can kind of imagine. And this, I think, really kind of summarizes Nar Shaddaa really well, because if you want to do absolutely anything illegal, this is where you would come. But despite all of this, I think Nar Shaddaa is a very beautiful place filled with all kinds of neon signs, all kinds of activity, and there's a lot of things going on here, especially if you play Star Wars The Old Republic, where you'll get to learn a little bit more about the history of Star Wars Galaxy, and of course learn more about the Hutt space, which covers a very large part of the Star Wars Galaxy, and also get to interact with Hutts themselves that do at some point betray you. Not to spoil this for you, but watch out for the Hutts. But anyway, I think that's all I wanted to say about Nal Hutta and Nar Shaddaa, and of course the system of YouTube. And I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did enjoy this video, don't forget to subscribe if you still haven't. Don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends. And if you know anything else about the system of YouTube, or you know anything else about the Hutts that I haven't mentioned here, please post it in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Check out some of the other Star Wars videos I've posted before, and also check out some of the other Universe Sandbox 2 videos. And don't forget, there's more videos coming, so stay tuned. Thank you for watching, get me later guys, and bye bye.